just really enjoyed that feeling. So this is really the best tribute we can have to her, to bring all of you, maybe for the last time, all together in one place, all of you who were part of her enormous social circle. So thank you for coming. It's a great tribute to her. I hope you can hear me to some extent. Okay. I'm Ryan, my sister Robin, my sister Pat. They asked me to give kind of a brief overview of my mother's life. So I started writing and writing and writing, and then cut and cut and cut and edited it, and I cut it down to about 1 minute and 47 seconds per year. So it should be out of here sometime around 7. Let me see. I do want to say a few things before I get to just a chronological survey or something. To be perfectly honest, my mother really did not plan on dying. I know not many people do, but my mother really didn't seem to have given it a thought. In the past few months, she kept up her typical schedule. She'd been to a writer's conference. She was sketching a book on California adobes. Her apartment was just littered with notes on stories she was planning or actually actively engaged in. She'd bought a new computer. She'd written up her adventure in the Baja backcountry last summer and given a presentation on it, and she was clearly eyeing another trip somewhere. There's not many 93-year-olds who can give you the impression that they were cut down in their prime. But that's just the thing. She really was always in her prime. She was always doing things she loved doing, or maybe just loving the things that she was doing. I can't honestly say when her salad days were. As a student carrying her 10-cent Shakespeare through the Berkeley Hills, as a career woman succeeding in a man's world in 1945, as a bride, as a stay-at-home mother, a travel writer. It seems like she embraced every phase of her life with enthusiasm, with grace, and the full expectation of happiness. Everyone here, the first thing you'd say about Marcia is that she was a woman of seemingly endless energy, especially as she charged past the ages of 70, 80, 90. Believe me, it started long before then. She had a way of leaving in her wake a trail of bystanders, all shaking their heads saying, "If I had her energy." But this energy wasn't just some magical source like a perpetually full tank of gas, and it wasn't an end in itself. Her energy wasn't what made her who she was. It was merely the result. And it had its source in her insatiable interest in people, in life, and in the things of this world. So I don't think my mother avoided thinking about death because she feared it. I think it just didn't look very interesting. And this is saying something, because just about everything else in the human experience did interest her. This interest wasn't always the most productive or the most focused. And if you ever had her as a driver, you probably wished she was a little less interested in the sights around her and more in the dull black top in front of her. She had a passion for California and Western history, for Mexico, for craft work of every description, the life of tide pools, birds, music and art, geology, minerals, for edible plants, basket weaving, architecture, abalone mariculture. The list is literally as long as her life. Her interest in things drove her to explore and to read. Her interest in places to travel. Her desire to experience things, to cook and eat strange foods, learn lost craft lore, and a lot of other things I can't even list here. Her interest in people led her to create networks of people, to join groups, to plan gatherings that always seemed to have a tendency to become traditions. She seemed only to gather friends, never to lose them. Despite outliving virtually all of her contemporaries, she still lived in a vast web of friendships, organizations, and groups. She nourished friendships across decades and across continents because once she knew you, you became part of her life. And there's another distinct product of her character. She never scowled at the modern, she never scowled at the modern world. She loved old things, old craft traditions, old Spanish California, old architecture and art. But she wasn't nostalgic for a better time. It was just interesting to her. I sometimes marvel that someone born at a time when horses competed with cars on the streets could, nearly a century later, struggle to post pictures on her blog. And, trust me, friend her son on Facebook. She lived through war, the 60s, political and social upheavals, the upending of every rule she grew up with on race, on gender, on behavior, on taste and style. She never complained about the world's direction. Well, except during the previous presidential administration. Another story. In accommodating new ways and braving the latest technologies, she wasn't trying to win an award for being a with-it nonagenarian. She simply saw no reason she shouldn't be able to embrace the 21st century as she had embraced every previous decade and to participate fully in it. After all, she was still in her prime. Okay, now for the recap. She was the youngest of 5 children, raised in the San Gabriel Valley, Alhambra High, Pasadena City College, then UC Berkeley. Yeah, I've gotten through 20 years pretty fast. I know she took geology, English lit, and Latin American history because 70 years later she still had the textbooks. And what she learned was still informing her life and thought. During the war, her first marriage took her to Mexico for several years. Despite a difficult life there, she fell in love with the country, typed out a novel about it, and would return dozens of times in subsequent years, the last time just 8 months ago. She came back to Los Angeles and became a career girl, working as an editor for California Stylist, Holiday, and Look magazines. She met one lifelong friend there, Ruth Solner, and on VJ Day, if I got the story correct, met another, Bob Ragland, who would soon introduce her to a naval officer named Dick Reed, returning from the war. Is that right? Yeah? Good, finally got it right. Not long after she described him to her parents as not son-in-law material, Marcia married Dick. She settled into the housewifey roles imposed on a generation of post-war brides, which for her meant throwing her enthusiasm into charitable organizations and going by the improbable name of Mrs. Richard R. Reed. Then came the children, Robin, Tad, and finally me. We slowed her down some, but not much. A few years ago, I came across 2 photos of her. One sitting with friends at a Dodger game, dated literally the weekend before I was born. And another of her sitting happily on a bar stool in Hussong's Cantina in Ensenada, dated a few weeks later.